Hey everybody, Gregg Bendian here at the ProgCast, kind of here to do a special tribute episode in honor of the guitarist, composer, singer from the Allman Brothers and of course Great Southern and his own solo groups. Richard "Dickie" Betts passed away last week at the age of 80. And he is someone that I grew up admiring and was lucky enough one night in 2003 to be asked to sit in with his band. And I wanted to share that story with you all, but I also want to bring in my good friend, guitarist, and collaborator, Tim Motzer. Hi, Tim.
How you doing, Greg?
Doing okay. Thinking a lot about Dickie and Southern rock and all the components of it that were really just such a uniquely American kind of fusion of styles.
Yeah.
And you were there at the beginning. You saw them pretty early, right? The Allman Brothers.
It's I have kind of a cool story in that it was 1975. I was still in high school. I might have been a freshman or a sophomore in high school at that time, and was already listening to the Allman Brothers. And I remember hearing, the Fillmore concerts and the earlier stuff. Like, I think I had a double album that was comprised of their first two releases. And
Beginnings?
yeah, so I got both records early on. And what I realize now is, listening to those records from 1969 and 1970, is those were blueprints. Those were blueprints for Jeff Beck. Those were blueprints for Jimmy Page. I mean, when you listen to what they were doing, I'm like, wow. I mean, it's pretty heavy stuff, right? Um, and then fast forward to 75, and my cousin calls me out of the blue and say, "Hey, I have an extra ticket to the Allman Brothers. You want to go?" And I'm like, "Yes." And I'd never been to a concert before. Certainly local stuff and high school stuff, but never been to a concert. So we drove to Cincinnati from Hamilton, Ohio, to Riverfront Coliseum. And it was the opening week of the Coliseum as well. So a brand new facility. And I don't remember this, but Muddy Waters opened the show. And I have a feeling that we got there late. And some reason I don't think I caught that, or maybe we just caught the end as we were getting in there or something. But I remember distinctly just going down to the floor and trying to get as close as I could to where Dickie Betts would be, because I loved his guitar playing and I wanted to get up there and see everything I could, how he played these songs and where on the neck he played them, the kinds of chords he used and all that. So I was able to get really close. And they came out, and it was just an overwhelming experience for me. 15-year-old guitar player, had been playing since age 11 and was soaking everything in. So that was like the first real major experience I had, seeing a great player like that and a great band, and listening to Gregg Allman sing and play the organ. And he's right there watching his Leslie spinning. And I'm just like, geez, I was in heaven. And It's Not My Cross to Bear was their second tune. I forget what the first song was called. It's also off their first record. Um, but anyway, it's the one that's like, down, 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 down. That's what they opened up with. Bam,
Oh,
dun, dun, dun. Ain't Wasting Time No More, or maybe that's not it either. But
that's not Ain't Wasting Time No More, but I know the one you're thinking of.
oh, I'll look it up. I have it right here. Don't Want You No More.
Yeah.
And then It's Not My Cross to Bear. So they did those two back to back. And I remember Dickie came out and he had a cigarette in his mouth and he was playing, and a solo came up and he took a drag and stuck it in his top of his guitar, and he's playing, killing solo, and he reaches down and gets a cigarette, takes another puff, and hands it to somebody in the audience. And I was just like, dude, this dude is so cool. And they were just killing, and they played 3 hours that night. So that was my first experience. And you know, when you're that young and impressionable, that kind of experience really goes a long way because it totally inspired me. It set like a higher goal for me as a guitarist. You know, just the deep soul and deep blues of what Dickie had and what the whole band had at that time. I hadn't seen Led Zeppelin. I hadn't seen Jeff Beck. I loved Jimi Hendrix at that time, but never got a chance to see him, you know? So, you know, all those kinds of guitar players that were in that ilk, to see them play really helped a lot. And to see how they were as people on stage and stuff like that. Very inspiring. And, you know, I still remember that. It really, you know, it was definitely a life high point at that time for sure. But it's also a memory that still sticks with me as just such a strong moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, Dickie Betts was a huge part of what made the Allman Brothers tick,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, and the instrumentals were so important to me as a
Me
young
too. I
musician.
love them.
You know, drawn to that idea that this was like a Southern jazz rock band,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Muscle Shoals.
Something really uniquely combinatorial, just in terms of what was going on, and the ability that everything was on the table, so that large scale improvisation was
Yeah.
happening in that band, but then it was a roots band.
Yeah.
You know, then there were swing elements in the band, and certainly jazz elements in the band, and you know, it was kind of the flagship of Southern rock for
Yeah.
so many of us.
They had it all. And, you know, I think about Dwayne playing at Muscle Shoals, right? And playing those on those Aretha albums, and the people that were coming down to record at Muscle Shoals, and they were all around that. They were all a part of that. All that music was mixing up, all the soul and the R&B they had and the jazz. It was all part of that. I think of Dreams. I think of Elizabeth Reed. You know, it's like on and on, you know.
Atlanta.
Atlanta. I mean, major, major compositions, major, major pieces of history of, you know, the rock and roll. Um, Vernacular, I guess, is the word.
Yeah, and you know, these are gigging, as you say, gigging working musicians. And Dickie Betts had already been working in bluegrass. He had been working in Western swing bands.
Hmm.
He had been working in jazz bands, all sorts of styles of the guitar, which he then kind of becomes an amalgam of all these things. And
Yeah.
I always felt that his soloing style was very bluegrass influenced.
Yeah. And by the time he got to Ramblin' Man, you know, it was country songs, you know,
Mhm.
they were writing. And I think there were probably other elements of that, but Ramblin' Man was probably well, it's definitely his most well-known song. I don't
No,
know.
it's their number one song.
Allman Brothers' number one song, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, back when that came out, I think it was on. I forget which record it was on. Brothers and Sisters, maybe.
Mhm.
When it came out, it was just on the radio all the time. I couldn't get away from that song. It got to the point where waking up in the morning at 7 o'clock, the alarm go off, Ramblin' Man be playing. So I'd hear that song 10 times a day, you know.
Blue
It was
Sky,
huge. Blue Sky was huge.
Jessica.
Jessica, Midnight Rambler.
Jessica is an instrumental hit single.
Yeah.
It is unedited to this moment when it's played on the radio,
Mm.
and it is beloved. And I just get chills thinking about that this man would be able to land these many singles, including an instrumental extended piece that has harmonic movement. I mean, I think I felt so honored to be listening to the Allman Brothers as a young person. And then when I was in high school, I played in a band, a rock band, where we played in memory of Elizabeth Reed
Love that track.
by Dickie. And it was always a fun thing because, there's the drum feature in it, and, there's all these really cool sections, and it's very dramatic, I think. And so that sort of brings me to the story of getting to play with Dickie Betts, because back in 2003, I was commuting on Mondays up to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to sub for the drummer in George Garzone's The Fringe. So I was doing Mondays, completely free jazz, small jazz kit, and really hooking up with John Lockwood, who was the bass player in The Fringe, and my trio pianissimo with Steve Hunt. So it was just like, it was completely open and very much jazz. So the being able to play jazz, but it's still free, like anything could happen, but it was jazz. It was definitely jazz. So I think it's June of '03. We're playing, and it's after the first set, and a young man comes up to me and he says, really, really sounds good. Really enjoying your playing. I'm a drummer. I went to Berkeley. I said, "Oh, cool. So, are you gigging?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm play drumming. I play drums for Dickie Betts."
Whoa.
And I thought, "Wow, that's so cool. What's that like?" He said, "Oh, it's really cool. It's really great. He lets everybody play, and it's really fun, and he's cool." He said, and his name is Mark Greenberg. I want to say, shout out to Mark for making this incredible memory happen. And he said to me, "We're playing tomorrow night at the House of Blues in Cambridge. If you're around, why don't you come by and sit in?" And I had no plans to be there the next night, but I made plans. I was going to drive right back, as I had been doing like every Monday that summer, just drive back from Boston at 2 in the morning. So I
Wow.
stayed on a friend's couch, and the next day went over to the House of Blues around sound check time, I guess 4 o'clock or so. And I see Mark, the drummer, coming out of the bus, and he says to me, "Oh man, I'm so disappointed. There's really no way you're going to be able to sit in because the stage is so packed. It's a small stage, and we have 2 drum sets and a percussion setup, and we have an organ. We have to climb through the organ legs just to get on stage." He says, anyway, come meet Dickie. Come on the bus. So we go on the bus, and Dickie's sitting there drinking a Pabst Blue Ribbon. He's got a chaw going, and he's expectorating. And Mark goes up to him, and he says, "Dickie, this is my friend Gregg Bendian. He plays drums with the Mahavishnu Project." And Dickie immediately erupts and says, "Mahavishnu, you playing with that Mahavishnu stuff?" He said, "You must be a bad motherfucker if you're playing that Mahavishnu. I tell John, I said hi. I love John. The Allman Brothers and Mahavishnu played shows together back in the day." And
Yeah.
like, I'm like this, like, okay, not expecting, this at all. And he's talking about how much he loves John McLaughlin and how
Sure.
important he was. And he says, you know, when we started the Brothers, I brought the jazz and Dwayne brought the blues. So now he's already like, he's talking shop to a fellow musician. And in the middle of this conversation about that time period that you're talking about, when 71, 72, these bands are playing their hearts out. And he turns to Mark and he says, Mark, make sure Gregg sits in on Elizabeth Reed tonight.
Dude.
And he turns to me and he says, you know Elizabeth Reed, son? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, okay, I'm going to announce you. Now, the thing about it was the whole band were really good players.
Sure.
No, it was not a party atmosphere. It was very like we're on tour, we're working.
Yeah.
And that fascinated me, especially this was on the heels of Dickie having been let go or pushed out of the brothers by Gregg and whatever the power structure was around that time. So, here I see him fully functional, okay, and totally on top of stuff, excited, want to talk about Charlie Christian, want to talk about Miles Davis, just a complete jazz freak, a complete music geek. And so he invited me to go to catering. Everybody in the band was excited that there was a musician there who was going to sit in, and that something, there was somebody there that really got what they were doing. The other guitar player was Dan Toller, who had also played with the Allman Brothers, and
Player.
great player, great contrast to Dickie in the way he approached the solos. But again, that twin guitar thing that Dickie brought over from the twin fiddle thing in swing music that now is in the Allman Brothers, and Dan Toller and Dickie are playing their ass off. Dickie's singing great. The band is really on like a listening level, very sensitive, very dynamic. And I'm watching this, Blue Skies, all the tunes that they're going through, Jessica. And then about an hour into the show, he says, we have the drummer from the Mahavishnu here. He's going to come up and play. So I squeezed my way through to get to this second drum set, and the other drummer, not Mark, but the other drummer, I wish I would knew his name. He was great. Moves over to percussion. So now we have two drum sets and percussion, and we're going to play in memory of Elizabeth Reed. And there were a couple of things that they changed in the rubato sections. So I had to sort of like listen, lay back and follow around. But other than that, it was just like straight down the middle. Dickie takes an unbelievable solo on this. And we get to the break. And we go to the drum thing. Dickie walks over to the side stage of stage right and just stands there like this, rocking and just listening to us play. Tim, we played for like 8-9 minutes. It was not like it was going to be, you guys get your little 12, 24 bars in there and then we're coming back in. No, you looked over at Dickie, he was digging it. We kept going. And it was that spirit of that musicality, that music, that kinship, that like, what are you going to do? I mean, I know the drum break from the Fillmore East section, but now we're doing something else. We're doing our thing. And it went on and it went through to some different areas and it was very dynamic. And, finally, Mark pulls the transition and we get back into the tune. Boom, right? Go through the whole thing. People go nuts. I start leaving the stage and Dickie comes over and he bear hugs me. And he goes, man, that was so beautiful. That was so great. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm saying, thank you. Thank you. That was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. It's like Monday night, free jazz with George Garzone. Tuesday night, classic jazz rock country with the Allman Brothers, Dickie Betts. Incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible moment.
he strikes me as a cool dude, you know. It's
Like,
nice. It's nice to hear that story.
that's the thing is I really want people to know that that was the Dickie Betts that I experienced, where it was all about the music. And what a player, playing, really playing great in '03.
In '75, one of the things that I think that I definitely gleaned onto was the professionalism of everybody that was on that stage. No one was jumping around or anything. Everybody was playing. They
Mm.
were killing. And I don't know that I'd ever seen anybody at that level, play at that level. And it was just like it was impactful. It was like, wow, this is some deep shit, you know.
I wanted to also say before we split, just that it's very important for people to remember historically that when Dwayne Allman died suddenly and the band was in crisis, Dickie Betts was the guy that really took the reins, started singing more, started writing more slide all of a sudden.
Had to, yeah,
Really,
yeah,
and that can't be discounted. The importance of him getting Gregg and the rest of the guys through to this next time
yeah,
where he's the only guitar player until they start to figure out, who their second guitar player is going to be. Like Les Dudek, I think, is on Brothers and Sisters on some of that. So, it's really important to look at Dickie from that perspective. And also don't sleep on his solo album Highway Call. Highway Call is side one, really good Dickie songs, vocal songs, and side two is Texas swing jams with Vassar Clements on fiddle, and it's an
wow.
incredible band. If you don't know that Dickie Betts album, Highway Call is a must because it shows other aspects of his musicality. I mean, what a diverse and accomplished musician, and what an honor to have had a moment with him. I happy to share that with you all. And Tim, I know you're someone that really gets the impact of that music.
It was really impactful in that time. And I think the album that they were touring was Win, Lose or Draw at that time. And I haven't heard that album in decades at this point, but it kind of like the Allman Brothers were very impactful in those formative years for me playing guitar. And I had an Allman Brothers book and I learned a lot of the material, and that kind of stuff. And the other memory I have of that time is that everybody I hung out with in high school had cassette players in their car, of course, and Fillmore was in everybody's car. And it was blasting out of their cars when we would hang in the parking lot and stuff like that, just like we did with Sabbath, just like we did with Led Zeppelin 2, just like we did with, you know, all those records of that time. It was right there sitting with all of them, all those early albums. The Fillmore was huge. And right next to that was Jethro Tull also. I remember that, so all these kinds of things were formative bands for both you and me, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I remember being at a party and it gets down to the last handful of the hardcore hang guys, and
Yeah,
somebody puts on Whipping Post and we're going to do the whole thing,
sure.
right?
Yeah. And even Zappa covered that.
Yeah.
That's quite a nod. Um, yeah. Amazing music. It still stands. I listened the day that Dickie died. I listened to the first record, one from 1969, listened to the whole album, was completely blown away. And that's what led me to feeling that that was like the template for that whole scene in a weird way. If you listen to all those songs, everything is there.
And I love that he felt it somehow important to pass on to me that it was a jazz blues band.
Yeah.
I brought the jazz and Dwayne brought the blues.
I think something else is interesting is, you know, we were obviously touched by the Allman Brothers and Dickie Betts, but also how many people were
Mm,
inspired. And, you know, that leads into like the Dregs. And, you know, you mentioned Mahavishnu. So I think of Steve Morse and like the combination of Mahavishnu and the Allman Brothers in a way, you know.
100%.
It totally makes sense to me. And we were totally into the Dregs too, because we were into Mahavishnu and the Allman Brothers. So when the Dregs showed up, we were ready for that. Let's go. Where's Andy West? Let's go.
And they're coming around for a reunion run. Looking forward to Steve Morse and the guys playing that material. But yeah, it was also label mates.
That's
Capricorn
right.
label mates is the Allman Brothers and the Dixie Dregs.
That makes sense. Forgot about that.
Bill Walden.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so this is the thing is I think we embrace American roots music, but I gotta feel like the jazz influence of, yeah, but what more can we do? That jazz notion is in that Allman Brothers music where, yeah, well, what can we do to really improvise? What can we do to push ourselves? How do two drummers play together? These are early lessons for
Sure.
us.
Yeah.
Well, they don't play their fastest and hardest 90% of the time, but they got a simmer going.
But you know, it would be really cool to go back and find some early Dickie Betts interviews, like early '70s and stuff like that, because those guys had to be listening to Coltrane and Miles as well, and everything else that was around at that time. Everybody was really, you know, so um, everything was so connected. So when you would see them playing in that maybe a spiritual way, really kind of the kind of depth of soul that they were playing in. It was heavy, you know, it was as heavy as anything.
You know, the fact that Dickie brought up Charlie Christian to me, and that when he talked about Miles, he was talking about Miles from Bird all the way up through Bitches Brew.
Sure.
So that tells you something right away about his attitude about the progression of the music. You
Yeah.
know, it wasn't just going to be jazz anymore, and it wasn't just going to be country anymore. Now it's going to be something else, fusing together all these elements.
Yep. Amazing. Quite a life.
Thank you, Dickie Betts. You will be missed. And I'd always hope I'd see you down the road again. But the music is eternal. It's inspiring to this moment. Find all the live stuff you can find online. The 2003 tour that I dipped my toe into is documented on YouTube. There's video from that time. And yeah, they're killing. So I want to say thank you, Tim Motzer, for this little hang we had
Oh, great
in
hang.
honor of Dickie, you know?
As always, I'm glad we got to do that this week.
Yeah.
Very important.
So again, everybody, thank you for checking us out and like us, subscribe us, patronize us. We're always happy to hear from you at bendianmusic.com. And that's it for me, Gregg Bendian from the ProgCast, and my friend Tim Motzer. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.